Hello and welcome to an overview of the Rogue Grid plugin. The Rogue Grid plugin is currently at version 0.5. There's still some more work to do on it, but this will give you a basic grid that you can use with any game. The grid features a visible grid for your terrain. It works with streaming terrains also, and allows you to apply data to any cell or track actors across the grid. If you're using the Rogue Grid plugin, you can get support on Discord, or you can contact me through Patreon. You can also purchase the plugin via my Patreon shop. In this video, I'll cover the features, how to get it set up, the settings available, and we'll go through the code if you want to interface to that. There's actually a requirement for the data to access the code. Essentially, it's a struct that is stored on each cell, and you can add to that, but I'll go through that in detail. So I'm going to start with a new project, but this could be any project, your existing project. If you have just created a new project, just close it down, browse to where your project is, and I'm going to create the plugins directory. This may already exist if you've got an existing project with plugins. And then wherever you downloaded the Rogue Grid to, just extract that and copy that into the plugins directory. So the file structure should be your project, plugins, Rogue Grid, and then the contents. I'm going to relaunch the project. You can either launch through the U project or the SLN. If you launch through the U project, it will prompt you to build Rogue Grid and just select yes. We'll come back to the C++. I'm just going to build the project. If you're not seeing plugins here, I'll just wait till this finishes building and I'll show you how to fix that. Just close it back down and then delete your intermediate and binaries and your SLN. And then on the U project, just go to show more options, generate Visual Studio, and that'll generate project files again. They're all temporary files, what we just deleted, the intermediate and binaries. So fine. And then when you relaunch, and after it does its scan, you should have the plugins directory there. Oh, there, it's there already. We'll come back to C++. Okay, once in the editor, there's a couple of steps we need to do. If you can't see the plugin in the plugins directory here, the Rogue Grid, just go to settings, show plugin content, that'll show it up. It'll also allow it to appear in other menus as well. The first thing we're going to do is add the data asset. So if you come to the Rogue Grid content data, we've got this data asset that I want to add to the asset manager. So we're just going to come to the asset manager, add a new type to scan, and then we're just going to call it Rogue Grid data. And we're going to search for the Rogue Grid data base class, the data asset, and I'm going to add a directory. No, I always breakpoints there, but it still works fine. I'm just going to add that directory so I can find that data. If you are going to create your own data asset, in content directory or whatever, and whatever subfolders, just add that directory there. You can add multiple directories for it. And this just tells it where to scan from when it's got an ID file, where to scan to find the actual file. An ID reference, sorry. So that's that. The other thing we want to do is we want to add a collision channel, and you may have this already, but this is if you've got a blank project like this, and we want to add a trace channel, not a collision channel. So we're going to add a new channel. I'm going to call it terrain, and it'll default to ignore. If you're using an existing landscape you want to apply the grid to, you'll need to just come into select all your landscape if you've got more than one, like the streaming proxies like this, and just come to collision, change this to custom, and just set that terrain to block. I'm not sure why that's already block. It should should be default to ignore. But anyway, yeah, so when you come in, it'll probably look something like this, and just tick that over to block for the terrain, and that just will give you a more accurate projection onto the grid later. The other thing we need to do is come into the project settings, and there's rogue grid settings here. So under grid, we need to assign a data asset, so either create your own or assign the one that I've got in the data. We'll go over that in a sec, and just change that terrain trace channel to terrain. It'll probably still work with visibility, but it's going to be much more accurate, particularly if you use visibility and you have like buildings or any other actors in the world. It's going to affect the grid. So let's have a look at this data now, because this is what configures the grid. So in here, I'm just going to make sure this is good because we just added that asset back in. So I'm just going to cycle that like that and save it again. And then, so this will coordinate to visually display the grid. So you can have a grid that's not visually displayed. You might just want to use it for data management of some kind. And then this second option is to show the current cell. It'll highlight the cell where your mouse is. Why have we got two show grids? Anyway, I'll fix that up. I must have duplicated it or something. Originally I had it in developer settings, so when I copied it over, I must have doubled up. The grid size, pretty self-explanatory. You can play with that, changes how big the squares are, and same with line width. And then this grid params, you don't really need to touch this. This is just a parameter file that configures all the settings that get passed to the material to display the grid. So like there's nothing, you can leave this all as default. It's all handled in C++, but you can have a look at that if you want. So just as long as that's assigned, that's fine. And then this is where you configure the look of the grid. So you can either have the same color for like a checkers style, or you can have different colors. And the highlight, so that's that show current cell, that's what color that'll come up as in, and then how transparent the grid is. The fade distance is when you zoom in, the grid will fade away, so you still can have nice visuals up close, and then you can play with that. I've got some more settings that I want to add, and that's the reason why it's 0.5. I've got a frontline system that you place an object and it'll calculate random front lines for you, so you can sort of have like enemy and friendly territory on the map, things like that. But I'm open to suggestions on the grid if there's some features for the grid you want to see. I'd like to do a hex grid in the future, but we'll see how we go with that. It's much more complex. I have done it in the past material-wise, but like it does your head in when you start doing the data access and all that. So like I just need to get the master right, but I'll probably get there eventually because I like hex grids better, to be honest. I think they're more strategy games, more strategically interesting. So the last thing we need to do is actually add the grid to our material, so our whatever landscape material we're using. So for the sake of an example of adding it to an existing material, I'm going to grab this landscapes material here. So let's go have a look. This is the proc grid. So I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to move it to my content directory or wherever you want to, wherever you got your material, right? But you need the actual material, not the instance. And then I'm going to rename this something different. I'm going to call it proc grid, rogue grid. I can spell. So once in your material, if you just search for rogue, you'll get the rogue grid as a material function. You can add that in. And all you need to do is add it to your base color. So probably at the last point. So if we go off here, go add, bring our base color to here and add it in. We're good to go. So we can save that and then close that off. And then I'll come back to my grid. I'm going to create a material instance. I'm going to save it. And then on our landscape, we just need to update this material. And you can see the grid's coming through now. which is going to be just using default settings. So if you've changed the grid size, don't stress that it's not correct. But there's one other step you absolutely have to do, and that's search for dynamic. Use dynamic material instance. That needs to be enabled, and then enabling it on the top landscape level will enable it for all the others. And that should be it. The only other consideration, so let's just the select, in this show current cell won't work. It needs some additional code in the player controller, which I'll cover in a sec, but let's just check the grid's working. There we go, we've got a grid. It's not very exciting when you look at it like this, so let's just stop this. I'm gonna switch over to my example map now. I do have in here a game mode, which will just give you, like if I apply this override to this game mode, the row grid game mode example, all it does is give you a mouse pointer. But, it's messed up now, but gives you a mouse pointer. But let's just go over to our example map here. I'm not going to save that one. World partitions, load some of the map. So I've got a little test map here, and this is already using that game mode, and then in that game mode I'm also using a test player controller, which doesn't have a blueprint representation, but basically I'll cover it in C++, but what it does is it updates the mouse pointer's position and tells the grid, hey, this is the current cell we're looking at, do the highlight, and passes that on to the material. Let's have a look at that. You can see now, what can I move? Let's have a look at this. Oh, I've got no pawn class, right? That's weird, considering that should be just the default one, but need to stop. There we go. So if you got something like the RTS camera or something, it'd be in this sort of view. There we go, we've got a grid. And to access the grid, there's a bunch of functions and they all come through the subsystem. So let's just do it in our game mode because that's going to be the easiest place to get a blueprint system here. So to access the grid, you just need to get the grid subsystem. So if you search for a grid, so get rogue grid subsystem, it'll give you a reference, and then off here you should have, if you just search rogue, it'll give you all the functionality that is available. So the game mode, we would be better off doing this in a player controller. Let's do that. Let's create a player controller. Maybe I'll leave this player controller in for us. Sorry, let's make that inherit off the grid one. And then in the event graph, in here, for example, if we want to get the row grid, we just go row grid sub, get the subsystem, and then we can start querying the grid as what we want to do. And if you open up, if you link this off and then just type rogue, you'll get access to all the functions. So we've got a mouse position on terrain, so we can get our current mouse position, and this is obviously self. And then once we've got the position on the terrain here, we can do the same. So off here, go rogue, and let's get the cell data from world location. We can just do that. And then you've got access to the cell data, and you can, now we can get the, that's the cell. So now we want to get, or maybe I chose the wrong one. Get cell data, what we wanted. So we can go like that. There we go. And then this, it will be whatever's in your cell data. So at the moment I've got who owns it, the color, the actual coordinates if you need those, and I've just got an array of actors, which it's not really doing anything at the moment because I don't have any test actors in, but it's just an example of data you can, by editing this struct, you can add whatever data to the cell that you want to add. So I think that's enough for the blueprints, and then the setup's obviously working. So let's go over the C++. In the plugins row grid, I'm going to come into the row grid, and we'll start with the data. That's our grid data asset. So if you want to add any other data that you want at the startup, you can do that in there. You've got your data types, so this is probably the one you're going to want to configure early on, like to add whatever data you want to store on each cell. Basically, there's one instance of this struct for every cell. So whatever data you want to store on a cell, this is where you'd apply it. So if you wanted to store, the number of actors in a cell, you'd have a int32 and you'd store that there and interface with the cell to upgrade it. I'll show you how to do that. Got the developer settings, not much to really add here. That's just the configuration. So the game mode, all that's doing is setting up RTS sort of input there. But the player controller has that. If you want to show the current mouse or current grid with the mouse, that's that function here. That's what that's doing. So it's getting the position on the terrain and updating the highlighted cell. And it's running on the local player in tick. So if you just move that code into your existing player controller, that'll all work. Grid utilities is just a function to get the landscape size. So that the grid uses that to calculate the grid setup. So that's not really much to see there. But the subsystems where all the grid happens. So all those functions that we had in blueprints are all here. So if you want to add any others, like if you add custom data to a grid cell and you want to extract just that data through a function, then you can do that here. But I've tried to capture, like a number of common calculations, like common interfaces that you might want to use, but it's not complete by far. And then you've got your grid creation. So the grid starts in the on-world begin play, loads the assets, and then creates the grid. And that's where it's using that landscape size to figure out the grid sizing and all that, and how many cells there is. And then it creates the texture for the material. That's what configures the cell colors and all that. And then there's an update timer for, I didn't put this in tick, I didn't think it needed to be in tick, so you can configure that rate if you want to slow it down or speed it up. But it won't, if you're not showing the grid, it won't go. So this timer is what is updating the cell, and it needs to constantly run, especially if you're using a streaming terrain, because there's no way that I know of to get an event when a terrain piece is streamed in. So this just sort of runs and applies the current grid texture to that streamed in landscape proxy. So you'll see there's a bit of a delay because I've put it in a timer, not on tick. But if it's annoying, just reduce this time or just move this to tick, this function here. It could be a bit resource intensive though. If you're using, I haven't really put in a configuration for when you're just using a straight landscape, or you're not even using a landscape, you just got a floor or something like that. That'll be something I will be adding, but this obviously won't be needed for that because it's not streaming. What else do we got? So yeah, that's assigning the grid texture. That's probably about it really. Then there's there's that function we used in blueprints as well. So I hope this is useful to someone. There'll obviously be some more updates in the future on this one, and if you've got any feature requests for this one, throw them in the comments of this video or contact me directly. Thanks for the support on Patreon. Really appreciate all the support I've been getting with the plugins that have been coming out. Hope they come in handy for lots of people. Once again, if you want any help with the setup of this plugin, don't hesitate to reach out. Discord and the support channel is the best way. Thanks for watching.